Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Soon, there was a very noisy sound coming from behind. Sebastian frowned, thinking for almost half a day before he could recall who Solomon was, but he had always been reluctant to put his deceased wife's most beloved sister on the spot. He kneaded his forehead, then signaled the meeting to adjourn and went out. "Tell me clearly what's going on." Marie, ecstatic to hear him on the other side of the phone, quickly repeated the abuse her son had suffered, saying that Solomon was not only innocent but also a good man and that those corrupt cops had brutally detained and even abused him. Sebastian had a doubtful look on his face upon hearing her words. As far as he knew, Marie was a harmless woman. He could not help but start to wonder if Solomon was innocent after hearing Marie's hysterical scream. He was worried about whether the police had made a mistake. Sebastian's voice sounded serious as he asked, "Where are you now?" Marie hurriedly told him her location as she wept. After hanging up the phone, there was no hint of sadness on her face. She looked at those who hurt her son in front of her and said triumphantly, "My brother-in-law will come right away, and all of you will get your dues." She pulled out her mobile phone and contacted the lawyer whom she had contacted before. He was a lawyer well known for handling criminal cases in San Giotto, and he never lost. She dialed the phone, full of confidence. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. Marie was puzzled but only pouted. "Since this damn lawyer doesn't want to pick up the phone, I'm not going to call him a second time. Just wait for Mr. Wyants to come and fix them." With this thought in mind, Marie sat in the police cell with her son in her arms, deliberately making herself and Solomon look miserable as they quietly waited for Sebastian to arrive. Because of how serious the situation Marie had described over the phone, Sebastian arrived in no time. As he entered the door, he saw a group of men standing by, and a beast-like cry came to his ears. "What the hell is going on?" Inspector Pierce was standing there. Seeing Sebastian coming, he quickly led him inside, saying as they went, "I'm Colt Pierce, in charge of Solomon's case. Ms. Freeman, who claims to know you, has met her son. We have come here to wait for you at her request and take you inside to see the two of them." Sebastian glanced at his assistant, who nodded at Inspector Pierce. "Thank you for your trouble." He knew very well what kind of woman Marie really was, and in Sebastian's absence, she even turned her nose up at her own kind, let alone outsiders. She was simply arrogant, flaunting her powerful connections. Mervyn was not at all surprised that she could send the police officer to lead the way. Sebastian did not look too happy as he heard the howling. He could almost hear it clearly as Inspector Pierce walked deeper inside. "I think I've heard this voice before." Inspector Pierce led the two men inside and soon reached where Solomon was. He motioned for the two to look inside and then stood aside. The surrounding guards saw Mr. Wyants and Monroe coming, and they all greeted them. But Sebastian and his assistant did not bother to acknowledge them but looked at what was happening before them. In front of them, Solomon's eyes appeared scarlet, his face strangely bruised. He was constantly banging his head against the wall, and the beast-like roar came exactly from him. He seemed to be in a lot of pain as his hands constantly created new wounds on his body. Marie, beside him, could not stop it. Even her face was scratched by Solomon in many places. When she saw Sebastian, her first reaction was to block Solomon from his view. "You've finally come. Quick, help me get Solomon out. He becomes like this because he suffocates here. It must be like this." Judging by what Marie said over the phone about the wrongful conviction of Solomon, and Solomon's hysterical state, he immediately knew what was going on. He looked at and scrutinized Inspector Pierce, who was looking at Solomon coldly. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. As far as he knew, Solomon might not be a wonderful child in the traditional sense, but he had made no major mistakes. So he could not understand why Solomon had ended up like this. Anyone who had a keen eye could tell that this was a manifestation of drug addiction. When Inspector Pierce heard Sebastian's question, he respectfully told of what had happened in its entirety, and provided the surveillance video of Club Studio and the testimony of the woman who was abused that day. It was almost beyond reasonable doubt that Solomon had committed the crime out of his own free will, as there was no evidence supporting the notion that he was forced into this. Hearing what Inspector Pierce said, Sebastian looked at Solomon with a growing bitter look in his eyes. especially when he learned Solomon was dropping his name in prison. His anger almost reached a tipping point. Thinking of his phone conversation with Jared yesterday, where Jared was urging him to let go and not to harbor a scum. At that time, he was still clueless about what he was talking about. But now, it turned out that Jared had gotten the news and warned him beforehand. Seeing Sebastian's frosty face, Marie trembled uncontrollably and cried, "You know Solomon. He has always been well-behaved and never fools around. Someone must have framed him." Sebastian looked at her puffy, pale, and unrepentant face, and for the first time, an utter disgust flashed across his face. "All evidence points to his culpability. Look at your beast-like son. How can you still have the nerve to say that someone else has framed him?" Inspector Pierce continued to show him a stack of photographs that clearly documented Solomon's violent abuse of the woman he had been victimizing for a year, his record of hitting and injuring someone in a drunk driving accident, and finally, his vicious behavior toward Car 16 while racing at Mount Daytona. This disc clearly records the entire process. You can take it back and watch it. Had the driver of the car behind him not been skillful enough, he would have been killed because of Solomon. And Solomon's reason for doing that was because of lust. At this point, Sebastian looked at Solomon, his eyes turning piercing cold. He has got a nasty streak in his character. He tried to kill but failed, and then came to the clubhouse to numb himself with drugs. Sebastian calmly summed up what Inspector Pierce had just said, with no expression on his face. He looked at Solomon, who was addicted to drugs, as if he were looking at a dead man. "It's impossible to be Solomon. My son did not kill. Isn't that guy still alive and kicking? Why condemned my son? Solomon is, at best, a little more playful. Believe me one more time, please." Marie was still quibbling about it and glaring at Inspector Pierce. "It's all because of this guy. He framed my son." "Shut up," Sebastian snapped with a frown. Sebastian turned to look at Inspector Pierce and nodded gently. "Don't worry about me. You may deal with it however you like." He handed the photos and CDs to Merwin, then continued. "We'll go back and review them. It was my fault that he mentioned my name." Inspector Pierce looked at Sebastian, not expecting that not only did he not defend Solomon but even wanted to punish himself. So he quickly waved his hand at Sebastian. "It is not your fault." As soon as they saw Marie's conduct, they knew exactly what was going on. Mothers are the best teachers, and if mothers misbehave, it would be a miracle that their children can grow healthy personalities. As Sebastian said nothing but just waved his hand expressionlessly, Merwin knew it was a sign that he was already extremely angry. He looked at Marie and Solomon with disdain and had no hint of sympathy on his face. "Karma will get you," the assistant thought to himself. No one can do something bad forever without receiving punishment. Marie watched as Sebastian walked outside with no hesitation and had no intention of helping her and her son. She could not care less about Solomon, who was hitting his head against the wall, and rushed out after Sebastian. She kneeled in front of Sebastian and cried loudly. "My sister asked you to take good care of me. You can't just leave my son like this and me. So, Solomon has just made an insignificant mistake, nothing big deal. Please bring him back, and I will educate him well, making sure he won't make the same mistake again." Sebastian looked at Marie as if he did not know her. She did not reveal her true nature to him for the past 10 years, but now she was showing the cloven hoof, laying bare everything for everyone to see. "She got close to me because she was after my power and influence. I wonder how many times she has dropped my name to get her way." Thinking of how well he had taken care of Marie and Solomon, whom he seldom saw, he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was no emotion on his face. He had only tolerated Marie again and again for the sake of his deceased wife, but now it was clear that she took all this for granted. Sebastian looked at Marie and said coldly, "I have never allowed you to drop my name, Marie. I didn't punish you because of Molly. But now, don't let me see you again." Marie immediately looked up at Sebastian in disbelief. "No." But Sebastian had already turned and walked outside, not sparing Marie another glance. Merwin, Sebastian's assistant, politely chatted with Inspector Pierce for a while, talking about some details and telling him he would not interfere in their work, so they could handle the case as usual. By the time he came out, Solomon had stopped his madness, looking at Merwin in a daze, and then asked with delight, "Has my uncle come to my rescue?" Merwin ignored him, and Solomon saw that the former shook hands with Inspector Pierce. When he saw Marie being all lost in a corner, Solomon's face instantly turned pale. It was simply because favoritism gained from one's all-encompassing love will never last long. Martin opened the door and saw Mr. Wyance was on the phone with someone, with something playing on the television beside him. It was a car race footage. Martin did not interrupt Mr. Wyance as the latter spoke. He went over to have a look and saw the purple-gray car constantly overtaking one car after another on the screen. The skills on display were extremely beautiful, and Martin could not help but let out a whistle. It was because of that Solomon that Martin did not like racing. I never thought that San Giotto had such a skilled racer. Soon, it was the scene of that car against car number 14 throughout the entire process. One could see that car number 14 was pulling all sorts of illegal maneuvers. Not only did he change lanes maliciously, he even deliberately blocked the view of the other, as if to cause car number 3 to collide with car number 16. When he saw this, Martin's expression gradually darkened. From a top-down perspective, he could see that car N0.3 was rushing over from that corner. However, car N0.16's vision of him was completely blocked. He could almost see the tragedy that was about to unfold. Martin looked at ill-intentioned car number 14. It did not seem to think that car number 16 could catch up, so much so that the former even skidded. At this distance, even car number 14 could not escape the crash. Martin was cursing at that car number 14, and he also did not understand why his father had gotten his hands on this accident footage. However, just as he was about to get up and not watch the tragedy that was about to unfold, the corner of his eyes caught something. The purple-gray car suddenly went on two wheels as it sliced through the air in a perfect curve as drove straight through between the two other cars. Martin stood there stunned and could not help but replay it. By the time Mr. Wyance got out, he had seen his son sitting on his luggage as he looked on at car number 16 on the screen as it approached the finishing line and shouted, "Go! Go! Go! Overtake number 3. When Mr. Wyance saw his son reacting like this, he wanted to open his mouth to scold the latter, yet he could not find the words. Martin saw car number 16 rush past the finishing line and let out a cheer. The footage then stopped abruptly there. When he was about to turn around to look for the remote control to replay the footage, he found his father standing behind him with a complicated look in his eyes. Martin looked at him as he frowned and put down the remote control in his hand as he immediately walked toward his room. Suddenly, Mr. Wyance's voice came from behind. "Did you see what car number 14 did?" Martin turned around and gave his father a faint glance, not expecting the latter to take the initiative to talk to him. He nodded. It was clear he was going against the rules that even an outsider like me could tell. "What's the matter?" Mr. Wyance looked at his son and sighed as he said, "That's Solomon's car." He originally thought that he would see a look of surprise on his son's face, yet he found the latter accepting it without any doubts. Now, it was Mr. Wyance's turn to be surprised. "Don't you have anything to say about it?" Martin looked at him and said somewhat expressionlessly, "I'm not surprised if it's him. When I was 10, you bought a toy for me, and when Marie came, Aunt Marie brought him to play at our place. He took a liking to the toy and wanted it from me. I didn't give it to him." Speaking of this, he looked at Mr. Wyance, the latter seemingly having no recollection of this incident at all. Martin let out a self-deprecating smile as he continued. "He then pushed me into the pool. He thought that he could drown me, but unfortunately for me, I learned how to swim. But when I got out of the pool, he had already taken the toy away." He looked at Mr. Wyance in the eyes and said impassively, "When I told you he pushed me into the pool, you thought that I was just trying to hide the fact I lost the toy and asked me to sit in my room to reflect on my mistakes. For him to be able to do that at 10 years old, I could tell that car number 14 was him. Now that the truth is laid bare before you, would you believe the 10-year-old me now, Mr. Wyance?" Mr. Wyance looked at his son with deep regret. His throat struggled hard before finally forcing out a sentence. "Martin, I did not know the truth was that back then." This was the limit of his apology. Martin looked at him, his gaze calm. "I know. I don't blame you." He smiled at Mr. Wyance and then asked, "What about Marie? Oh no, Aunt Marie." Mr. Wyance frowned. He looked at his son, whom he did not know how much the latter had suffered, and deeply felt that he had wronged the child. "You don't have to call her Aunt Marie anymore. I have ordered her forever out of our doors." Immediately after, Mr. Wyance told Martin what he had experienced, and the expression on Martin's face slowly changed. That stupid cousin of his, too, knew very well that there was a bottom line that he could not cross. Someone must have done him in. When Martin thought of this, he was so glad that he said nothing. No matter who this person is, Martin thought. I really need to thank you. As he thought of this, he looked at that clearly unusual car number 16. Soon, a thought appeared in his mind. Dad. He interrupted Mr. Wyance and asked, "Can you help me investigate who the owner of car N0.16 is?" Although the Riddle family had been taken away, Sean found himself a literal nemesis standing before him. Looking at Jared as he slowly closed in, his steps may look slow, but he very quickly arrived before Sean. He did not even look at the former and instead walked toward Nicole. "Are you all right?" Just that back then at the Rogers family banquet, these people had never paid him any heed at all. Sean's face froze somewhat. Liana saw that Jared was walking toward her, and she ignored the blade on her throat as she eagerly called out to him. "Jared, I'm here." She looked at him with anticipation, as if she was sure that Jared was here to save her and take her away. Yet Jared straight up ignored her as he walked forward and stretched his hand out light, smacking directly against Liana's neck, instantly knocking her out. Nicole then let go, and Liana collapsed onto the ground. Jared gave her a disgusted look before turning his eyes toward Nicole with a gleam in his eyes. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Nicole shook her head as she tossed the blade in her hand away and put the small silver knife away. She then stepped across Liana's body. She titled her head slightly as she looked at Jared with a curious look. "Not leaving?" A smile appeared in Jared's eyes as he looked at Nicole and stretched his hand out to hold hers tight before letting out a gentle yeah. Sean was looking down at the handgun to his side, and when Nicole walked past him, she said, "I'd advise you to not move." Sean immediately looked up at her. When he saw the two holding hands together, he clenched his fist, yet the intent to fight back still lingered in his eyes. When Nicole saw that expression, she knew that he did not understand her warning. She calmly looked at Jared before saying, "This whole place is under watch now." Her eyes were cold, yet her words were spoken out of kindness. "Just look at your body. There's an infrared laser already aiming at you. If you make a move, you'll die." It only then did Sean look at his body, and sure enough, there was a not-so-obvious red dot on the left side of his chest. He gave Nicole a complicated look before putting down his raised hand slightly. "Thank you." Nicole did not say anything. It was as if she had just said something very ordinary and did not care about the other party's gratitude. She then took her two mobile phones from Sean's pocket and then walked away without even looking at him. Sean looked at her and suddenly asked, "Nicole, did you go to Mount Morose when you were 7? Nicole ignored him as she continued walking. The men in black did not dare to move after hearing what she said, and no one dared to stop the two. Yet a blizzard formed between Jared's eyes as he looked on with a half-smile at Sean, seemingly unhappy with the latter's snooping. Nicole's attention was however on the factory door that was blown open. She glanced helplessly at the man beside her and said faintly, "Use a smaller explosive next time." If it were not for the factory being decently built and renovated, such an explosion might have very well brought the entire building down. When he heard her saying that, Jared immediately looked at her, with both warmth and a smile in his eyes. He then blinked at Nicole, but did not say anything else. He of course knew that he should be using a smaller explosive, but he was in such a rush just now that he could not be bothered to change and just used the one that he was most familiar with. But all these, he will never tell Nicole. The two walked out together, and Nicole, after observing the location of this factory, realized that it was in the suburbs and was not too far away from San Giotto. "How did you find me?" Jared pointed to Zeke, who was waiting for them. He was hiding behind a rock, and seeing the two were safe, he rushed to them. He had used Jared's GPS system to look for Nicole. It was fast and took just mere minutes. Having said that, Zeke looked at the unscathed Nicole. His eyes were flushed with worry. "Nicole, you really scared the hell out of me. How did you get kidnapped when you are that skilled in fighting?" Nicole looked at him and smiled. She did not say much but instead looked at Jared. When he nodded back at her, she was finally relieved. It seems like they are safe now. Nicole then looked at the man's handsome eyes as she sincerely said, "Thank you." Jared did not say much as he looked at Nicole and took out his walkie-talkie and growled, "Take them all out." Claus received the order. As he looked at the surrounded factory, his eyes turned icy as he made a gesture to charge. These people dare to lay their hands on Nicole. Let's see what boss has to say about that. It's time to teach this uppity Rogers family another lesson. They would need to properly teach these groups of people how to behave. Soon, a series of wails and cries rang out from behind. Jared smiled deeply, and as he looked at the young lady before him, he made an inviting gesture to her. "Come, I'll send you back." At the same time, Mr. Riddle Sr. sat on Mr. Johnston Sr.'s car as they returned to the Riddle family manor. He wanted to invite Mr. Johnston Sr. into the house but was politely refused by the latter. "There will be other opportunities," Mr. Johnston Sr. said, with deep meaning. Mr. Riddle Sr. was a little confused as he gritted his teeth and asked the question that had been plaguing him for a while. "Maximilian, we've not been in touch for the past 2 years. What happened that you would come over to rescue us from this predicament?" Could the Riddle family have something that would have Mr. Johnston Sr. take it so seriously? This really surprised him. Mr. Riddle Sr. did not panic. With the gulf between the Riddle and the Johnston family, if they could garner the favor of the Johnston family, it would be a leg up for them. Mr. Johnston Sr. looked at Mr. Riddle's A smile slowly appeared on his previously stern-looking face. He did not say much, and only left a sentence before driving off. "Benjamin, you have a good granddaughter." Mr. Riddle Sr. was instantly stunned. Could it be that Mr. Johnston's is here because of Nicole and Jared's betrothal? But for the matter of this betrothal, although he had always supported Nicole, Mr. Johnston Sr. had made no indication of it, and in the past few days, he had heard that Jared had come to the manor to get Nicole to break it off. So why did Mr. Johnston Sr. save us at this very critical moment? What is going on? Recalling that Nicole and Jared were indeed close. Could it be ill? Mr. Riddle Sr. was more and more puzzled. He was helped by Daniel and Damien, yet he was still pondering on the matter as they entered the door. Seeing his father like this, Damien asked, "Dad, what did Mr. Johnston Sr. tell you just now? You look so puzzled." Mr. Riddle Sr. only gave him a glance and did not say anything. He walked to his seat in the hall and looked at his sons and daughters-in-law as he sighed. "We can consider ourselves fortunate for someone from the Johnston family to save us. Otherwise, Christo Rogers will not have let us go so easily." Everyone looked at each other and nodded in agreement. Looking at the many guard posts in the manor that had popped up, Mr. Riddle Sr. was much more at ease. Gradually, he calmed down from the shock he had gone through earlier as a thought immediately occurred in his mind. He swept his gaze across everyone present and asked, "Where did Dylan go? Why is he not here?" A glint appeared in Damien's eyes. He had already noticed Dylan's absence since the beginning. At the thought of this, he squinted a little as he asked, "Dad, who asked you to go to the Rogers family manor?" Mr. Riddle Sr. pondered for a bit before saying, "If I recall, it was the young lady of the Rogers family who asked us to go over, and there was no mention of Christo Rogers back then." Dexter, too, frowned as he added, "Yes, it was Dylan. Dylan told me that you went to the Rogers family manor and asked me to head there too." Daniel nodded as well. "Yes, it was the same for me as well." At that time, he too was perplexed as to why Dylan, who had always looked down upon him, was smiling and talking to him. By the looks of things, it was a conspiracy. Damien looked at Mr. Riddle Sr., and a cold glint appeared in his eyes. "I was also called over by Dylan. It seems like he was planning this all along." Just as everyone was in the hall, Snow and Rain, who were upstairs, walked down holding hands in surprise. When they did not see Nicole among the crowd, Snow let out a satisfied smile. "It seems like Liana is quite reliable." Rain's expression was a little unnatural. She looked at her uncles and her grandfather, feeling that her hands and legs felt unsteady. Seeing the two coming down, Mr. Riddle Sr. immediately questioned them. "Snow, Rain, where are your parents?" Snow's expression did not change much as she let out a soft yawn before saying, "Grandpa, I heard that my mum said she wanted to go shopping before I arrived." Judging by the time, They should be back soon. Rain looked nervously at Mr. Riddle Sr.as she asked softly, "Grandpa, where did all of you go? Why didn't we see any of you here when we arrived?" Mr. Riddle Sr. looked at Rain. His face no longer had his usual gentleness but instead rather stern. "We were held hostage by Christo Rogers at his manor and almost had endangered our lives." "What?" Both Snow and Rain looked at each other, and they were extremely shocked. "My deal with Liana was for her to hold the Riddle family at bay and to allow the people from the Rogers to get their hands on the elusive Nicole. But now, Grandpa said that his life was almost in danger. What was going on?" Damien looked at the sisters and let out a cold sneer. He then slowly said, "No need to doubt, we were almost done for at the Rogers family manor. So, we want to know what the role two of you, who were their messengers, played in all this." Both Snow and Rain were taken aback and could not find the words to speak. At this very moment, the Riddle family's manor was opened as the sound of Karen humming came through. She was in a good mood as she talked and laughed with Dylan, as if something good had happened. Both Karen and Dylan were very happy to be able to get rid of Nicole, and their plans could be called perfect. Since Preston would not help them to lure Nicole somewhere, they could use Liana's influence to forcibly deal with Nicole and also gain her favor. It was killing two birds with one stone. The two of them were impressed by their intelligence that they happily went shopping and did not bother to cover their tracks at all. With everyone else brought to the Rogers family manor, and only the two of them were missing, did that not tell him something? Mr. Riddle Sr. looked at the two of them, with frost forming in his eyes as he coldly asked, "Where did the two of you go?" It only then did Karen and Dylan realize what was going on. They looked at each other and could clearly hear the chill in Mr. Riddle's. Dylan replied cautiously, "We went shopping and just only got home." "What's the matter, Dad?" Why was everyone looking at him with such bitter resentment? Liana should have only just invited them over for a meal. Damien let out a sneer as he looked at Dylan. "Shopping? You were in the mood to shop? Did you know you almost got all of us killed just now?" Karen's eyes widened in irritation as she heard that. She turned to Damien and said, "Don't you dare accuse me, Damien. We were only passing on what Liana was asking. You can't be trying to blame her, right?" When Dexter heard that, he could not hold back any longer. "Liana? What Liana?" "We were dealing with Christo Rogers, Mr. Rogers Sr. there. He even surrounded us with his bodyguards, and when we tried to leave, they were about to draw their weapons." When Karen heard that, she pursed her lips in disbelief. "Stop jesting. Why would Mr. Rogers Sr.do that to you? And if he really wanted to do that, how are all of you back here?" Seeing that she was still being stubborn, Mr. Riddle Sr. said coldly, "It was the Johnston family who bailed us out. The two of you better come clean on this. Was this your doing?" Both Karen and Dylan's eyes widened as they heard the Johnston family being mentioned and could not say anything for a time. Snow was still trying to argue, "Grandpa, we were just messengers and did not know anything else. If you want to know the truth of the matter, you should be asking that Liana Rogers." She was sure that the Riddle family would not dare to look for trouble with the Rogers family, so she pushed everything onto Liana. This was their strategy from the very beginning. When Dylan and Karen heard what their daughter said, they immediately nodded as they added, "Yes, Dad, we only heard that Liana wanted to look for you, so that's why we asked you to go to the Rogers family manor. We don't know anything else." When Mr. Riddle Sr. heard their words, he was a little unsure in his mind. After all, this was his son, and he did not believe that Dylan would really throw the entire family into the fire pit. But at this instant, a cold yet beautiful voice came from the door. "Is that so?" When Dylan and his family heard the voice, they were all stunned. There was no other reason than it was the voice of Nicole, whom they thought had been dealt with. "Why is she back here?" Nicole slowly walked in front of everyone, and when she looked at the shocked faces of Dylan and the others, she slowly let out a chilling smile. "Uncle Dylan, Snow, you lot seemed quite surprised to see me." Dylan had no other expression other than shock, yet when Snow saw Nicole, who was totally unscathed, she shrieked, "Why are you unscathed? Liana had taken you away." When she said that, everyone's expression changed. Nicole, too, let out a cold sneer as she faintly said, "It seems like you're very disappointed that I'm unscathed." Snow looked at Nicole before her and belatedly closed her mouth. She had even warned Rain not to let things slip, and here she was slipping up the moment she saw Nicole. Daniel and Gloria quickly grasped what Snow had meant. This girl had sent my daughter to Liana, who had long disliked and wanted to finish off Nicole. Daniel no longer kept up any appearance as he asked coldly, "Snow, what did you do to Nicole? Did all of you conspire with the Rogers family to purposefully do us harm?" Both Damien and Dexter looked at Dylan. The two of them, too, had experienced that horrific experience earlier. How can they show any goodwill to the culprit? Dylan glared at Snow, and just as he wanted to say something to remedy the situation, he found himself tongue-tied. What's the reason that the Rogers family would lay their hands on the Riddle family? His father and brothers had no reason to lie to him, so Dylan could not figure out what went wrong and how things had turned out like this. They even got the Johnston family involved, on the Riddle family's side even. Mr. Riddle Sr. quickly realized what Dylan and his family were planning and immediately cast a glance at them with a look of disappointment in his eyes. Although this son of his was not really useful, he had never given up on him. He even gave the letter a rather cozy position in the company. Yet this is how he repays me. This is how he repays the Riddle family. Nicole looked at her parents. She did not want to let them know about her kidnapping, but even when she did not say it, a voice rang out behind her, with a somewhat indifferent coldness to it. Compared to you lot, Nicole was straight up kidnapped by the Rogers and encountered an even greater danger. Snow and Rain looked over in surprise as a very handsome man appeared before them. His face was so beautiful it was as if he was spring incarnate. Handsome and gorgeous. Nicole turned to look at him and was a little surprised. "Why did you come in here?" Jared had sent her back to the Riddle family manor many times, yet this was the first time he had stepped into the place. Snow and Rain looked at Jared standing opposite them, and they very quickly recognized that he was Nicole's extremely influential fiancé. Rain looked at the two and sneered at them. "Mr. Johnston, this is the Riddle family's private matter. Please do not run your mouth if you don't know anything." What danger did Nicole encounter? She did not even say it herself, so who are you trying to fool here? When Nicole heard her insult Jared like that, a hard-to covial chill appeared in her eyes. Yet Damien and Dylan had already recognized that he was the same man that even Liana dared not be presumptuous to. Just as the atmosphere was very tense, a particularly excited voice came from the door. "Mr. Johnston, are you here to see me?" It was a rare visit back to the Riddle family manor, and Chloe did not expect to see Jared again after so long. She immediately walked over and gave Jared a bashful yet dignified smile before saying, "Mr. Johnston, it has been a while since Nottingbrook." When everyone heard Chloe call him like that, everyone was taken aback. Did Chloe know Jared? And they have met in Nottingbrook before? Everyone was still looking at Jared in shock. They did not understand why Mr. Johnston Sr. had saved them, but seeing that Jared was now here as well, it looked like his relationship with Nicole was not that simple. And did he also know Chloe as well? Jared did not look at Chloe before him as he stood by Nicole's side and gently grasped her hand. He then looked up with an indescribable authority within his deep eyes. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.